We're delighted to have you here. We're grateful that you would come and attend this 16th Annual Religion and the Humanities Conference here at Utah Valley University. My name is Brian Birch, and I'm the Director of the Religious Studies program here at UVU, and I also serve as Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs at the university. The conference this year is focused on a very timely and important and momentous set of issues that current events have really compelled us to look at more carefully, and even more recent events as we've seen in the Middle East. The title of our conference today is Religious Diversity and the Art of Civil Dialogue, Pluralism, Tolerance, and the Integrity of Belief. And we have 5 stellar presenters here today, along with a group of discussants which will engage the conversation with the presenters during the panel discussions. This is a little bit different format than we've had in the past. It's been more traditional in previous years where we've had a lecture and then open Q&A. So this is our first year with a more tightly knit, intimate discussion group, and we're excited that they're here, and we're grateful that they could join us. Our first session this morning is entitled Interfaith Dialogue in the 21st Century. And we are pleased to have 2 very prominent thinkers and leaders in this area, Dr. Susan Brooks Thistlethwaite from Chicago Divinity and Dr. Charles Randall Paul from the Foundation for Religious Diplomacy. The Reverend Susan Brooks Thistlethwaite is a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and professor of theology at Chicago Theological Seminary. She also served as the president of Chicago between 1998 and 2008. An ordained minister in the United Church of Christ since 1974, she is the author and/or editor of numerous books and has worked on 2 different translations of the Bible. She is currently working in a new area, which she calls public theology, and a new book on human nature and public policy. She writes a weekly column for the Washington Post's On Faith online section, which I read frequently, and is a media commentator on religion and public events. Many of you have seen Dr. Thistlethwaite on television and on the internet. Her previous works include Interfaith, Just Peacemaking, which she has a copy of, and we have some printouts with some order forms in the back of the room if you would like to order her book. And she edited this with Glenn Stassen? Stassen. Thank you. Okay, thank you. She's also the author of Adam, Eve, and the Genome, Theology and Dialogue with the Human Genome Project. She also wrote Casting Stones, Prostitution, and Liberation in Asia and the United States. She has many other works to her credit, and I have followed her work at the Center for American Progress, and am thrilled to have her here, and delighted to hear from her. Following her remarks, we'll hear from Dr. Charles Randall Paul. Dr. Paul holds an MBA from Harvard University and a PhD from the University of Chicago's Committee on Social Thought. So we have 2 Chicagoites of a sort here. He is the founder and president of the Foundation for Religious Diplomacy and has written and lectured widely on healthy methods for engaging differences in religions and ideologies. He is currently completing 2 books entitled Fighting About God, Why We Do It and How to Do It Better, and his second book is Converting the Saints, An American Religious Conflict. He is on the board of editors for the International Journal of Decision Ethics, and Dr. Paul has developed a professional career in the commercial real estate business, receiving the Phoenix Skyline Award for Excellence in Urban Development. So Randy is truly a Renaissance man and a longtime friend of mine and collaborator and partner. So please join me in welcoming them here today.
Morning. Morning. Hello, Sue. Yes, good morning. Okay, aloha, yes. All right. Yes, I brought copies of these books. I will pass them around after I refer to them for a second, but I'm going to quote from one. And fortunately, this display in front of me keeps the time, so I will try to respect our reorganization of time. But for what may be a very new concept to many of you, I did want to use the display, and I am actually happy to email it if you'd like to link it to the website so people could download it and study it. It's a history of this concept. What do we hear in the news today, right? War. War on drugs. War on religion. War on religious freedom. War on poverty. War on women. What's our primary religio-political metaphor? Come on. War. Yes, thank you. War. You should have gotten that, students. All right? The questions get harder from here on out. War. War. If your primary religious and political metaphor is war, does it any wonder you don't have civil dialogue? What you got is war. So it is my contribution to today's discussion that if you want civil dialogue, you've got to try to develop not more warmongering rhetoric, but in fact, peacemaking rhetoric and practices. And I am going to also, and I'm going to give you the conclusion first, especially since we are really going to run through this quickly, that tolerance is a useful concept in public discourse, and I do a lot both on public discourse and in the public. However, it is my view that if you really want to make an impact, what you need to do is take concepts internal to religion and use those to be able to make your case for what you want in the public square, which is civil discourse. And in terms of our work in Just Peace, which I will explain in a minute, we argue that this shared religious value is compassion and the cultivation of empathy. From the earlier Just Peacemaking book, I'm going to just share a little bit of that, and then I'm going to run through the 10 practices of just peacemaking. Peacemaking, whether in personal, group, or international relations, requires the capacity for self-transcendence. Self-transcendence is very key. Transcendence of one's own interests and perspective for the sake of understanding the interests and perspectives of the other. Empathy. Transcendence for the human desire for retaliation in kind, forbearance from revenge. How much of our discourse is tit for tat, revenge? Transcendence of the temptation to remain in isolation and animosity for the other. The capacity to envision the possibility of reconciliation. Empathy, forswear revenge, be able to at least, envision the capacity for transcendence. These are religious virtues. They can be cultivated or they can be destroyed. This is central to the concept of just peace. Now, in the history of the just peacemaking movement, many of us who worked on peace statements for our various denominations, for the United Church of Christ, I actually was the convener and editor of the United Church of Christ statement on peace, which was Just Peace Church. And subsequently, Methodists, Presbyterians, Catholics, Episcopalians, Quakers, Mennonites, Brethren, we all knew each other from the American Academy of Religion, the Society of Biblical Literature, so we started getting together. And through the 1980s and early 1990s, we began to try to do a Christian statement on peace. Now, if you really want to have some conflict, get 20 to 30 peacemakers together in a room. And we could agree on nothing. And then Glenn Stassen, with whom was a Southern Baptist, now American Baptist, with whom I have worked for 25 years on the concept of just peace. Glenn had helped us with this. Now I'm going to pass around and just pass it around. This is the revised edition, post 9/11, of the first Just Peacemaking book. But all of us who convened were in this Just Peacemaking decade, all working on various, the Lutherans, the Catholics, the Presbyterians, and then we all got together and we hung out and we funded ourselves. We raised the money ourselves so that our various denominations would not, in fact, control us. And we got money from the Carter Center in Atlanta and the Trappist monks. Those are the sources of our support. And so we worked for 6 years, and we've done 3 editions, 1998, 2004, and 2008. And the key concept that helped us break through this stalemate is what we call practice norms. Now, just war theory, which is a very prominent paradigm, has several steps or practices protect, for example, non-combatants. In the same way, just peace theory has 10 practices that you can use to make more peace, less war. Sometimes people ask me about this project and this book, and I say it's how to make peace in your spare time. So this is not a rocket science kind of thing. My husband's a doctor. We go to a lot of hospital events, medical things, and sometimes, largely to entertain myself, people say, "What do you do?" And I say, "I'm a peacemaker." This is a conversation stopper for many people. But a lot of people say back to me, "Well, peace would be nice, but it's not," students, practical, possible. It'd be nice, but it's not practical. But I will guarantee you, we will get out of this conference without any overt violence breaking out. Yeah? Right? Peace is the norm. Peace, norm. Violence, exception. But people look at violence and they go, "Oh, look at the violence." And in a country of Libya, 65 million people, 2,000 are rioting. Well, what does CNN pay attention to? What does the media pay attention to? Not the people who were holding the signs. We love Chris Stevens. We value his life. Not those people. The violence makers. But peace is a practice, and it's a norm. So we got the idea of practice norms. Now, I've got 10, and I'm 4 minutes into this, so we should be okay. Support nonviolent direct action. This, in the original edition, I helped co-author that chapter. Boycotts, strikes, marches, civil disobedience. One of the things that you'll notice here in this graphic is that this is Muslim nonviolence inspired by Gandhi. And this is a march that was organized by Abu Ghaffar Khan, Khan. In the 1930s and 1940s, he led a nonviolent action of 100,000 Pashtuns for social reform and freedom from the British. Marches from Occupy to Exodus. People take to their feet and they make nonviolent change. Number 2, take independent initiatives to reduce threat. Now, the picture that we have here is of the signing of the ban against atmospheric nuclear testing. And I'm old enough to remember the ban the bomb marches. And some of you may remember or have read it historically, Eisenhower unilaterally said, we will stop atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. Quickly, the Russians followed suit. Subsequently, Kennedy renewed the ban. Again, the Russians followed suit. And from that came still one of the sturdiest anti-nuclear statements that we have, which is treaties that we have, which is on atmospheric nuclear testing. And nuclear testing is a significant threat to peace. So that's an example of an independent initiative. An independent initiative can't be too much. You can't just, we'll take all our nuclear bombs and we'll destroy all of them, because that can actually be provocative. So you have to take clear, verifiable steps, and you have to move the ball down the field. The other side gets to respond, you get a response, and you can move it forward. But if you do too much, then it's provocative. So taking independent initiatives, both, and let me tell you, when I was president, administratively, state practices are very helpful in university communities, colleges, religious communities, civil society. You can break through a stalemate by taking an independent initiative. But you have to be clear, it has to be verifiable, and you have to let the other side respond. You can't control their response. Use cooperative conflict resolution. This is, of course, the Northern Ireland courts. Cooperative conflict resolution is a series of practices that have been developed over time to help people in dispute. It's sometimes now mandated by courts. I'm actually trained. I have a certificate in as a conflict mediator, and there are practical steps that people could know for how to do this. These are crucial steps for how we engage civil society today. Acknowledge responsibility for conflict and injustice, seek repentance and forgiveness. I read from Alan Geyer's chapter in the earlier Just Peacemaking book about this norm. And you know, we've got a lot of public rhetoric about forgiveness. Sorry. Right? But it has no substance underneath it. It has none of the religious themes of confession, change, seek. And you'll notice each of these has a verb. When we have a lot of public rhetoric, sorry, and no real change, it actually more corrupts the civil dialogue than it does move it forward. But there are powerful national and international examples of seeking to change a historical situation of injustice by acknowledging responsibility for conflict. And it is extremely important to remember, and I write this because I wrote the chapter in the new book on this norm, along with a Muslim colleague and a Jewish colleague. And what I wrote in my Christian section is, you can't change the past. You cannot change the past. But you can change your relationship to the past. And whether it controls the present and determines the future is actually up to what you do now. And as a pastor, let me tell you, this is as true in terms of bad things that have happened to people in their past as it is in national and international relationships. The past can have a dead hand grip on the present and close off possibility in the future. Or You can change your relationship to the past. You cannot change the past, but you can sure as heck change your relationship to it. And that's what this norm helps people accomplish. You can let it go. Advanced democracy, human rights, and interdependence. Democracies rarely fight each other. Democratic processes. We want to talk, the major theme of this conference, you want to talk about how you get civil society to move forward in terms of pluralism and tolerance. You need your democratic processes for that. People are not all going to agree, and you have to have nonviolent ways that people can engage and even argue vociferously about the direction they think a society should go without having to resort to violence. Foster just and sustainable economic development. Again, economic deprivation is a motor, an engine of violence. Some very fine articles have come out commenting about how unstable these various countries are in the Middle East because of economic deprivation. And in fact, in some of these countries, 50% unemployment among young people. You have 50% unemployment among young people, you are gonna get civil unrest as night follows day. I was in Egypt last summer, and I was at a conference on the role of nonviolence held at Cairo University in the January 25th revolution. But people at that conference, the Egyptians, to a person said, if we don't get jobs, we are going to continue to have civil unrest. So we don't particularly come out in favor of any economic system. In my personal view, the mixed systems are best, where some things like education or healthcare are not subject to the market, but in other cases, I think the market can be a huge engine of economic development. But we don't prescribe for this. We say, as trying to move tolerance forward, people need to have the means to support themselves. Work with emerging cooperative forces in the international system. I've got two graphics here of various types of organizations that have been cooperative forces in the international system: the Economic Union and, the European Union and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Two massive wars in Europe after, in the 20th century, and then the European Union. Now, the European Union is not doing so well these days. See previous slide on economic cooperation. These norms don't exist in silos, okay? They work together. Strengthen the United Nations and international efforts for cooperation in human rights. There's been an NGO explosion in the last few decades. Non-governmental organizations that work, Doctors Without Borders would be an example of this, that are peacemaking organizations because they practice these kinds of norms. Strengthening them, reforming the UN, critical. Reduce offensive weapons and the weapons trade. We don't have to look outside our own borders to see how an explosion of armaments. Who hunts with an AK-47? Nobody. These are offensive weapons. We talk about offensive weapons and the weapons trade. Nobody needs that many bullets to be shipped to them. What, by some online company? You've got to get your arms around the armaments. And we're on the south side of Chicago. You don't have to go to Aurora, Colorado. We have an Aurora, Colorado every weekend in the south and southwest side of Chicago. And it's the guns. It's the guns that come into these communities of deprivation, of gangs, of drugs, and you just add the guns, and you have so many deaths, so many young people. It is appalling. Encourage grassroots peacemaking groups and voluntary associations. Again, peace is made. Peace is made at the grassroots. Peace is made exactly by conferences like this and educational institutions that engage in a serious way. How do we build up more tolerance, and how do we try to work through the polarizations of our society? Now, following this work, and we've published these along the way, but this is a Christian document, and then many of us are very active in the interfaith movement. I'm a trustee of the Interfaith Youth Corps, founded by Ibu Patel, that works on campuses to promote interfaith understanding through service learning. So a group of us got together, and we thought, well, we got to start to try to do this work in an interfaith way. So the Christians who had worked on the Just Peace document, we got together with some Muslims that we knew from a number of locations, and we worked to produce a statement in advance of the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty that was being re-examined in the UN 2005. And so we came up with a joint statement, which was then delivered to the UN in advance of that conference. We affirm our belief in the one God, a statement regarding Muslim-Christian perspectives on the nuclear weapons danger. This went so well that we thought, ho ho, let us try to get bigger. So we organized, through the help of the United States Institute of Peace, a conference inviting Muslims, Christians, and Jews to consider the question of just peace norms in relationship to our three Abrahamic traditions. And Glenn Stassen and I are the editors of this. It's available free online at usip.org. And if you put in Abrahamic Alternatives to War in your search engine, you will come up with this. You can download it for free. And this conference, I think, to date, has the singularly most innovative approach to how you do this kind of interfaith work. Because what we said to people is, you know how you go to peace meetings, you know, like, I'm Christian, right? I talk about Jesus, right? I talk about the Sermon on the Mount. I talk about blessed are the peacemakers. But we said, to each faith tradition, bring your most difficult texts. So we brought Book of Revelation. I came not to bring peace but a sword. Jewish group brought Amalek. The Muslims brought the Quran statements on war. And so the Muslims interpreted how they, as Muslims committed to peacemaking, dealt with those texts in the Quran. We, as Christians, dealt with our own texts, Jewish similarly. So you didn't have any of that, oh yeah, you Christians are committed to peace, sure you are, but what about that whole Crusades thing? So, but we were the ones bringing how we deal with these texts in order to move the conversation forward. This worked great. And so we published that. And, you know, one of the things I learned from participating in this process, many of these texts are misused. They're taken out of context, and they need to be better understood within our individual religious traditions. But we also did interpretation in light of spiritual goals. Now, interfaith just peacemaking, 6 years. You know, if you're going to be an interfaith peacemaker, you've got to be in it for the long haul. I edited this volume. We had a grant from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund to get us all together several times. And we've been working on this a long time. And remember, all these people had also worked together on the Abrahamic Alternatives to War. It takes a lot of practice to do practice norms. And so each of the 10 practice norms that I shared with you has a commentary by a Christian, a Muslim, and a Jew from their own traditions interpreting this norm. And then each gives a specific practice where the norm has been, remember, this is not a theory of peace, it's a practice. So we, here in Boston, the Jews and the Muslims worked together to do this kind of thing when the mosque was under threat, and this happened. Things that have happened that are examples of that norm. And so, I'm sorry, did I go backwards? So this became the Interfaith Just Peace paradigm. There's a book, I'm passing it around. And what I want to leave you with here, and I did hustle up a little bit so we would share the time equally, the two colleagues, in presenting is primary religious and political metaphor that's in use today is war. War on everything. You engage that from within religious traditions, and you marshal the capacity for self-transcendence, empathy. You forswear revenge. You don't give tit for tat. And you imagine that these relationships can be transformed. And the reason you know that is that you not only know conflict in your society, you know that peace is the norm. And you can describe it. You know what it looks like. Look forward to discussing with you. Thank you.
I'm going to be, I'm afraid, much less lively. I'm going to have to read my stuff today to get it over. And so bear with me, try to listen. I call my piece Beyond Mutual Understanding, in praise of mutual withstanding, or healthy conflict, or creative contestation. My first section is labeled, The Problem Is We Disagree About the Map and the Destination. The subject before us is not world peace in the sense of a stable tranquility that has never existed. It is the perennial matter of finding the best way for our divergent ideals and ways of life to flourish while minimizing the damage we do to each other in the process. In our churning 21st century world, where we feel perhaps the nature of our troubling human predicament is starkly beyond our technical or rational or religious control, we have problems. We sense in our pluralistic time that all our claims about order and truth are contestable and incapable of gaining a worldwide consensus. It is not that the cosmic center is quaking, not yet, so much as we disagree about where that center is, and thus about our orientation to everything else. In short, we neither seem to agree about the map or the destination, less and less at home, let alone abroad. And that could mean home in the United States or wherever you are. And to make matters worse, we have no legitimate field or common rules for engaging the contestation over our comprehensive doctrines or religious beliefs. In our Western civilization, after the violent European debacle between religions, the Enlightenment leaders chased all religious contenders from the public field. And religious leaders segregated themselves from their pious rivals to avoid unresolvable theological debates. Indeed, for the most part, the history of social conflict over the purpose and destiny of humanity, religious conflict, if you will, has been played out in enclaves where the faithful, be they adamant secular rationalists or theists, set up straw adversaries that they demolish or disdain in absentia. These shadowboxing sessions are preferred over religious persecution and war, to be sure, but they have reduced our societies to groups of economic consumers who often hold, our collective societies, to economic consumers who often hold each other's ideals in the silent contempt we call tolerance. We should be amazed that we get along as well as we do, with the thin gruel of new product releases being the shared passion of our modern world. I am not bemoaning the loss of the past. It is the waste of our future that is at stake. We are living among societies that on one hand are living to be entertained or distracted from the emptiness of a positive purpose for continuing their culture, and on the other hand are trying to promote, often by coercion, a monocultural unity, be it secularism in the Western or Chinese modes, or one of the major religions. Of course, religion's great social value derives from its power to provide enthusiasm for common purpose or a common destination, and a map to achieve it in times of peace as well as in times of war. To be blunt, as William James said, because humans enjoy the excitement of mortal combat, one benefit of healthy religion is that it can replace killing others with forms of moral combat. James famously told his brother after he returned from the Civil War, "I wish I could have been there. You actually heard the bullets whizzing by your head." This is William James. He wished he could have been there. There is no higher moral contest than the contestation of the ideals upon which morality itself is founded. When our positive ideals collide, we can strangely enjoy the excitement of contestation, not between good and evil, but between better and best systems of belief and purpose and destiny. William James also said that these contests of ideals are the most interesting and important conflicts humans ever engage. On the social plane, they are truly invasions and counter-invasions that determine the future of our cultures as much or more than our technology, economics, or politics. So in our shrinking world today, it is evident to even the tribes in the Amazon that we earthlings disagree about our reality maps. The pluralistic situation is new in the common awareness that our diverse cats are out of the provincial bags. Our different moral beliefs grind on us, and frustrating tensions are exploding in the overseas as well as stewing here at home. We know only shallowly what is going on in the lives of those who disagree with us. If we are going to fight more peacefully in our contests over the right map and destination, we need to learn to do it persuasively as honorable rivals who want each other to live to fight another day over our worthy, contestable ideals. We need a new emphasis on robust conversations that matter deeply. We need to institute religious diplomacy and dialogue as a legitimate mode of honorable contestation beyond the mutual understanding of why we indeed ought to be opponents. Beyond the mutual understanding, we need to understand why we indeed ought to be opponents. This is new and timely stuff. No one really knows for sure how to fix our economic problems, or our Middle Eastern or Chinese or African problems, or our own problems with race and religion and gender here at home. But the old tools of coercion and bribery seem impotent when the goal is clearly influencing the hearts and minds of others, so we do not have to waste our lives and our treasure on such short-term, impotent fixes. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, unenslave ourselves, and then we shall save our country, and perhaps more. You know who said that? And at a time of great civil difficulty. There is no power for unifying the peoples of the earth greater than the sharing of the same religious worldview regarding the ultimate purpose of life and the best way to live. Over thousands of years, religion has proven most capable of unifying large portions of mankind across ethnic, tribal, economic, geographic, age, class, or political differences. Antonio Gramsci famously declared that if his beloved communism were to succeed, it must attain the hegemonic power of religious identity that required no Stalinist coercion to be sustained. He saw the Roman Catholic Church, the oldest continuously operating organization on the planet, was transnational and transepochal, embracing diverse cultures, classes, talents, and temperaments over scores of human epochs, because it was a comprehensive belief and social system that gave purpose to the past, present, and future to its members. William James said that when there is a showdown between the secular and the sacred, that religion drives all rivals to the wall. This driving power is not necessarily or even primarily a coercive force. The driving power, James also observed that the ideals we hold are the most interesting thing about us as peoples or as nations, and that the unresolvable contest between conflicting positive ideals is always the main event of any epoch, with the superior laurels always going to that ideal that, in being accomplished, maximizes the chances for all competing ideals to also be achieved. Not quashing or destroying the competition, but maximizing them, and yet, in that very act, being superior. I like to say it's a love contest. If you want to be superior in that contest, if you want to outlove me, I say bring it on. Okay? And there are hierarchies that we need to think about, that we actually want to create. Good contests that are truly win-wins. All right. In the Quran, those of you who are into the Quran, and the banquet, section 5, Surah 5, number 48, perhaps the most important scripture on the planet today, states that if God had wanted there to be many nations and religions in the world, he would have created the world that way. But in order that we might vie with each other, compete with each other in righteousness, he created many nations. And in the final hour, he will make our differences clear. It's a profound scripture that I don't think is quite replicated in any Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist scripture. Perhaps the Tower of Babel is the closest thing we can come to as a blessing to mankind by creating irreconcilable differences to test our righteousness and our love. I'm off on a tangent. In the realm of social influence, the religion that would surpass its rivals today must find a way to remain uniquely inspiring while promoting a social, political, religious environment in which its rivals can also flourish as best they can. This is a strategy for our pluralistic era to take seriously. Our strategies have great power too. Other strategies have great power too, but they are not sustainable. Bruce Lincoln observed in our time the perpetrators of 9/11 believed that they were ending, not beginning something. Their horrible act was a sacred power play to shake the paltry secular world to death. They were not replaying Pearl Harbor, but Hiroshima. The overwhelming power of their religious commitment was the bomb they hoped would change the world. This was actually an old strategy. Samson prayed for sacred strength to crumble the great building of his time, and by his death and that of civilians, to show everyone that God was in charge. Elijah, in his way, engaged in an interreligious event with 400 priests of Baal. And after he won the day, he slaughtered his competition without further conversations. But healthy growth today cannot be sustained with killing or exiling our rivals. It takes too many material and psychic resources to enforce a belief system on people who do not believe it. This is the great wisdom of Roger Williams, our American first founder, as Martha Nussbaum calls him. What does make economic and spiritual sense is persuasive diplomacy between religions that are confident in their positive messages. The conflict over the map and destination will be with us until some ultimate event brings an end to different human perspectives. In the 21st century, it is time for a robust religious diplomacy and dialogue to be engaged in a new interreligious space that honors our persuasive voices. But before we talk about a new future, let us reflect on our past in a new way. What time do I have here? How many minutes do I have left? 7 minutes left. I'm going to just, I think in 7 minutes, let me just say that there are mythic stories in all religions that take the nexus of communication into immediate conflict of difference right up to the level of the gods. Mesopotamian, Hebrew, Christian texts, mythologies reflect a war in heaven. And if we have a model for heavenly war, for heaven's sakes, how do we expect peace on earth? There is, therefore, a tension right there at the very, very basis of all of our religious stories, that somehow conflict exists in the heavenly world. That the great mystery is how a loving God, in the presence of the most loving being in existence, there could be conflict. How could that be? That question is brought down then to real-world problems. We have the earliest, perhaps, dialogian, Al-Biruni, in the 9th century. He provided the first comprehensive and comparative written dialogue between religions that was written in a balanced tone of fairness that was unique for his time. In the late 12th century, in Andalusian Spain, the Islamic, Christian, and Jewish philosopher-theologians also engaged in debates that required mutual learning that reflected in some ways what we construe as dialogue today. Violent crusades were more common than diplomatic religion, with the exception of the famous encounter between young would-be martyr Francis of Assisi and Saladin II, when the latter sent Francis home from the Crusades cordially, unmartyred, back to Italy after they had a very intense contestation over the superiority of their respective religions. It took the very bloody European wars between Catholics and Protestants in the 17th century to produce diplomatic efforts to engage in a religious form of diplomacy that would mitigate differences to avoid continuous wars based on unresolved theological conflicts. While Bodin, Cherbury, Fontenelle, and Vico all theorized about unifying religious beliefs to resolve conflict underneath the Christian sacred canopy, the Enlightenment project touted rationalism and scientism and atheism as the truth to replace altogether the contentiousness of superstitious spiritualities. Why fight over nothing, after all? We can all agree as calm, rational beings that we should only kill each other if it really makes sense here and now. And of course, it does if my bombs are bigger than your bombs. I can take what I want when I want it. Dostoevsky in The Wings, all things are permissible if there is no God. So after a century of enlightened genocides, we have come to the 21st century where conflicts influenced directly by religion are all the rage. and dialogue between religious folks is being touted as the way to mitigate it, and more, perhaps provide a healthy spiritual practice for people who are not engaged in mortal rivalries. The Roman Catholic Church has established standing committees of theological scholars to engage in discussions with Protestants and Eastern Orthodox to seek ways for uniting Christianity. These dialogues have treated the issue of Mary and the Eucharist and the apostolic authority differences without coming to terms as of yet. The Roman Catholic Church has also a standing dialogue group with Jews, and is working on one with Muslims and other non-Christian religions, including in that category, Mormonism. World councils and parliaments of religions have had various discussions about religious similarities and differences, and Religions for Peace and the World Council of Religious Leaders have formed collaborative multi-religious efforts to help the poor in Africa and elsewhere as a result of years of conversations about similar social goals. Ibu Patel's program, as mentioned today, is another example of social collaborations to bring about religious unity where it's possible. There is no UN for religions because many religious communities do not have a central authority structure, and those that do not want to sit together in a formal way that would give the impression of equality between their truth claims and authorities. Dialogue has thus occurred in an ad hoc way in most cases, in a time and mostly at grassroots levels. As an aside, regarding social power and dialogue, it's important to mention here that against the 19th and 20th century background of colonialization and in some cases cultural exploitation, if not genocide, the practice of interreligious dialogue is tainted as a front for asymmetrical exploitation and psychosocial seduction. The problem of teleological pluralism in its mode of emotional envy, resentment, and contempt is complicated by social and political power relations. For effective dialogue, the power relations must be disclosed and discussed openly and explicitly. However, since no relations are identical in power, and indeed social power can shift in any relationship all the time, all dialogues are inevitably asymmetrical. This reality is part of the content of the dialogue itself. I think I've only got a couple of minutes left at that, so I'll go on now to talk about what is coming in the 21st century. As more and more people have become acutely aware of the ongoing contestation over fundamental purpose and ordering of our lives, the only hegemony that has a chance of worldwide acceptance is the view that the world provides no single overpowering view of ultimate reality. More and more people find they cannot avoid the fact that they are amid diverse voices advocating and contesting different beliefs and values. In short, any new worldwide order in coming years will need to include methods for people to sustain continual contestations over the true foundation of reality, purpose, and value. Legitimate new institutions that allow for respectful engagement in interreligious diplomacy and dialogue of persuasion will need to replace coercive sanctions against belief and allegiance. We must develop normative conventions, some of the things we talked about today, for advocating and contesting our differences in a new category of legitimate public space called interreligious space. This is not the court, the legislature, the academy, the market, the media, or the sacred sanctuary. Interreligious space is a place in a building, in cyberspace, in media space, for adults to contest the foundations on which these other estates stand. What is new in the 21st century, then? The admission that intelligent, wise, caring people disagree about ultimate reality, and that even if they wanted to use force, no society has the resources to constantly eliminate competing views or to continually coerce people to believe something that they do not believe. As societies become more diverse, the recognition of contested pluralism leads both advocates and defenders of truth to patiently influence others only by means of forthright persuasion. History has proved that avoiding contestation through legal coercion or social suppression eventually leads to pent-up resentment and violence. In sum, research has proven that the number one factor for a flourishing society is public health. Only a healthy people can be consistently productive and maintain a sense of well-being. The number one public health issue facing our planet in the 21st century is not malaria or AIDS or any disease of the body. It is envy, resentment, and contempt between people with conflicting comprehensive ideals or religions. This public health plague attacks the basic desire for humans to form cooperative groups, without which no other disease of nature or culture and no positive creation of humanity can be achieved. Everywhere people are concerned with social public health, there's threats that are to our globalizing world. Think what the world would be like if some folks were immune to a deadly bacterium common in, I'm not going to go on to that one. That's a cool analogy, but I'm going to honor the time. I'm going to say that I'm going to end with this, 2 points. Lee Yearly submits that the new virtue for our time is the virtue of what he calls spiritual regret, which shares a temperament of conviviality and a virtue of agnostic respect. They are both forms derived from the inevitable, though usually unspoken, spiritual emotional temptation toward healthy contamination. This is precisely not disloyalty, but an active, positive mutual inoculation that allows all to thrive in a pluralistic, contaminating society. So as William Connolly preaches, the forthright engagement of differences with an attitude of agonistic respect or honor is the best prescription for public social health. We need to inoculate ourselves by being centered in our own traditions, spiritual disciplines, and then going forth and contaminating ourselves with the best the others can offer in their persuasive attempt to have us see the world their way. I will end with Simone Weil's very potent recourse to the first and best poem ever written in our Western culture, the Iliad, the poem of bitter force. She said, in this Greek epic, force appears in its coldness and hardness, always attended by effects from whose fatality neither those who use it nor those who suffer it can escape. Here the shame of the coerced spirit is neither disguised nor enveloped in facile pity, nor held up to scorn. Here more than one spirit bruised and degraded by misfortune is offered for our admiration. The Gospels are the last marvelous expression of this Greek genius, as the Iliad is the first. Here the Greek spirit reveals itself in the fact that human suffering is laid bare, and we see it in a being who is at once divine and human. She ends, but the purest triumph is of love itself. The crowning grace of war is the friendship that floods the hearts of mortal enemies. Before it, a murdered son or a murdered friend no longer cries out for vengeance. Before it, even more miraculous, the distance between benefactor and suppliant, between victor and vanquished, shrinks to nothing. Thank you.